to be here.
Okay.
Thank you guys for joining us. We are thrilled to be back with a ROCO Reveal. And we've been doing this throughout the pandemic. And frankly, we've been doing this for 17 years, just having everyone come into the backstages, see how the sausage is made, and get to know the musicians and the creatives, because we're all about connection. ROCO is about relationships and connection. And connection's my drug for real, and just how we weave music through our city, through our town, through our universe. So we are I am personally ecstatic about this premiere. It will be ROCO's 121st world premiere over all of these years. Just really the living composers, which we've discovered you can't Zoom with Beethoven during COVID, which would be weird anyway, but we don't. So just to get to know the composers and get to know that the language is still alive and living, and we're just so excited about this particular premiere. Joining me is Mark Adamo, a brilliant composer who's just had the world premiere of this piece this week, and Richard Belcher, ROCO's principal cellist, who is going to get to come back after COVID and come back and be with his ROCO family. So I want to talk just briefly. This concert is 5 o'clock Central this Saturday at St. John the Divine here in Houston, and it will be broadcast live for free. You don't even need to register your email. You can just come on and be an accidental tourist to experience all the things that we have to offer you. So I would like to say, Mark, let us talk about your brilliance in creating this spectacular piece and just how interesting it is and timely. And just so you already know this, but so many of our premieres this year are about climate change. And it's not something I machinated or asked for. And that's what I think is so exciting, is when you let people into their own creativity, this is what comes out as the zeitgeist of the day. So yes. Mark, please have a go at what is this piece and what is it called, and tell us a little bit about it.
Sure. Well, thank you for that dose of overpraise. Brilliance is this piece was actually partially inspired by the city of Houston, which has been a great friend to me. Musically, my first two operas were commissioned by Houston Grand Opera, Little Women and Lysistrata. And this is the, to have ROCO come in on this commission it feels like a homecoming in a certain way. But there's also a rightness to it insofar as what happened here actually inspired it, by which I mean that I had been hoping with Jeff Ziegler to put together a cello concerto project for many years, but he had been busy with his quartet work and I had been busy in the opera house, and the goddess of the calendar did not smile until quite recently. And he was free and I was free, and we pulled together a team of orchestras, of which ROCO and so many singers I know, so many musicians I know. Sasha Cook, who was my first Mary Magdalene in San Francisco, told me when I told her that ROCO was coming on, said, "You cannot have better partners. They're sterling. They're absolutely nonpareil." But we had the team and the orchestras, but the only thing I didn't have was an idea. And what happened was in 2018, I believe, for reasons into which we need not go, I came into possession of a recording of The Four Seasons, which is a piece that you feel that you know, even if you don't remember the last time you really paid attention to it. It's like oxygen. It's just, just ambient. But this time we wanted to hear the soloist and heard it start to finish as if we hadn't heard it before. And a couple of things happened. A couple of observations occurred to me. One is that it's not really about the seasons per se. It's about Vivaldi's Italians loving the seasons. There's an exuberance to the portrayal of winter or spring or summer, but there's also a sense of optimism and safety. The worst that happens is that, we're skating on the ice and we hope we don't get too cold, or there's an innocence to it, as well as a kind of extremity in the actual composition that I thought was really extraordinary. And then I turned off the recording and turned on NPR and heard that yet another of our once-in-a-lifetime storms, which now happen every 5 years, had hit your city, had hit the city of Houston. This was Hurricane Harvey, and which, had almost drowned parts of Houston. And just randomly, I thought, well, you couldn't write that piece now, could you? We have a completely different relationship to the seasons. We don't have that sense of security. We can't. And then an instant later, I thought, that might be something worth writing about.
Mm.
What if you were if you were Vivaldi now and trying to write that score, knowing what we know, what would you do? I thought, well, that's a big challenge, because now you're looking at something that we spend most of the times of our day trying not to look at, trying not to throw out the plastic bag and thinking that it might end up in the belly of the dolphin. I mean, I know I do.
Right.
There's a kind of Kubler-Rossian level of denial that you live with,
Right.
because you can't think, oh my God, the world is ending and I might be part of it. You can't go through your day like that, and yet the theater, and I mean the theater in the broadest sense, is the place where you go to, the safe space that you go to experience and metabolize dangerous things.
That's really well said. I love that. Well, and just, it is fun to hear the connections, just like you said, Sasha, who's brilliant. And what's interesting too, the premiere we did, as I already mentioned, in September, was based on The Ice Storm of Canada by Maxime Goulet, Canadian composer. And one of your movements is about that.
I know, a great coincidence.
It's like a massive 6-dimensional Venn diagram, right? All the different connections are just so incredible. And that's what's wonderful about music and how we can continue that story. What I also love, though, is that you are writing this piece in reaction to a piece. And so much of that is happening now. In February's concert, we also have a piece that is based on human trafficking. And it is, in some way, a reaction to the pictures at an exhibition that values the art and visual and females in visuals. So anyway, I love that you're reacting to something like this as well.
Well, there is a way you can, and composers have beautifully. I'm thinking of John Luther Adams, who wrote I think a 50-minute orchestral portrait called Becoming Ocean. And what he's really trying to do, it's not quite naturalism, but he's trying to put you in the waves, give you an aural impression of that process. He's trying to bring you closer to nature. I feel that as a composer, I'm better at looking at humans' response to nature than actually portraying it. And that's why, while one aspect of this piece is responding to Vivaldi, another aspect is responding to our dread of what may happen if we don't come to our senses more quickly. And one challenge that I had was, since I'm not going to write a portrait of climate change, because, well, what would that sound like? Is it possible, though, that I can look at our sources, at our musical DNA, if you will? Is there something in the music of warning or of dread that I could quote as richly as I would like to quote the Vivaldi, and make a dialogue between those two sources? And that's what led to the Dies Irae, which materializes only fully in the second movement. The way the piece works is that the first movement, has a brief fanfare that toggles between a music of brilliance and a music of somberness, if you will. And the Vivaldi in the first movement quotes the autumn movement of the Vivaldi, but it's subtitled Dismissing Eunice, which remembers Eunice Foote, who was the first scientist in 1856 to identify what we call the greenhouse effect. And of course, it was ignored for the usual reasons.
Well, as we're still at a higher level, let's bring in Richard too to talk about this and his first reaction.
I'll go on and on if you don't.
No, I would love to. I want to dig deep into the details of this. But, there's a statement of that you said, the dread and the beauty and the joy, and then the dread, and then the fear, and all of these things. And when you come to a concerto that you're reading for the first time, that you're learning, that you're working with a living composer, I know all those feelings are as well there when you are approaching something with excitement, but also with a trepidation. So could you just identify a little bit with your experience when you first encountered the score, and now as you've worked your way through this, just a little bit of your own, I'll say, evolution, for lack of a better word, in our theme here today?
Well, it's it's a really exciting thing to get to work on a piece that you've never heard, that you're going to be part of bringing it to life. That's a thrilling thing in itself. Getting the score, it's a little bit like a puzzle, and you work on a bit here and a bit there, and then gradually it starts making more and more sense. You start really feeling like you're getting to know the language more, where at first you're looking and there are beautiful bits here, and this is interesting. There's some clear Vivaldi snippets here, and but seeing, I guess with anything, with old music as well, it takes me a while to feel like I can really inhabit the music, and that's one of the joys, is spending time with a piece, and then gradually it sort of reveals itself to you.
And that's why it's called a ROCO Reveal tonight.
Reveal,
you guys are just all on the words. It's amazing. Go ahead.
It's an amazing experience, and of course the real thrill will be getting to play with the orchestra, because I can imagine it and tool around on the piano a little bit, but no one wants to hear me playing.
No, same here. No way.
But,
I'd rather play the
I can't wait. I mean, that's one thing that excites me, is seeing the scoring. It's so interesting. It's amazing. I can't wait to hear. It's very, very imaginative, and I think the moods are going to be something really special to savor.
I'd love to get into the details a little bit. It's a 4-movement work. I know that the first one is standalone, and the other 3 are kind of weave into each other. And I'll just say the titles, and you guys can talk through it. But the first one, Autumn Dismissing Eunice. And number 2 is The Winter, Le Triangle Noir. I don't have enough phlegm right now to say that. Spring, Zephaniah 1:14-15, and Summer for Julia, born 2045. When you get there, I do have the Zephaniah pulled up, but right now I'd love for you just to talk about dig in a little, Mark. I love how you start to talk about each movement, about
Sure. Well, in looking at each of the 4 seasons, I thought, is there an example? Is there a story or a trope that will both dance with the past and the present with equal grace, if you will? And that's why the autumn movement, which again I think of as the denial movement, although it's interrupted by the tolling procession of chords in the piano and the percussion that become the dies irae. That is why it stands alone. And then the next movement, as you mentioned, was inspired by this ice storm in Montreal in 1998, another once-in-a-lifetime event that is now anything but. And the thing that struck me about it was how Canadians remember it, because on the one hand, it was a natural disaster of such magnitude that the National Guard was called out. I believe more Canadian troops were sent to help those affected by the storm in 98 than they had sent to the entire Korean War. It was that level of a national disaster. But what many people remember from it are the images, because the whole area south of Montreal was rendered a sculpture of itself in diamonds. They're the most beautiful.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, these trees encased in ice. And that might make you forget that for 3 months, the reason that the region was called the Triangle Noir was that they had no power forever, because the ice storm had paralyzed the infrastructure of that period. And one of the things I wanted to get to in that movement was this sense that once we move beyond complete denial of what's going on, then the impulse is to aestheticize it, to make it seem, to use the beauty of something like that as an excuse not to think about it. And that's the movement in which the dies irae becomes closer and closer to being intelligible, that the distances between the intervals speed up, the differences between registers, compress, so that by the middle of that movement, it's very clear that what we have simply been hearing as piano and percussion chords off left and right are a warning. By the end of the second movement, and this is partly what Richard Cadenza does in leading into the third movement, by the end of the second movement, it's very clear that we can't pretend any longer that this doesn't exist. And that's the project of the third movement, the Zephaniah movement. And the reason I titled it that is because that's the text in the Old Testament from which we get the dies irae text, which we know in Latin, but was written in Greek. And so at that point, the drama, if you will, of the concerto is really joined. And so the theme of the Vivaldi spring is alternately put in this breakneck landscape where it seems like the orchestra and the soloists are trying to outrun the theme. And then there is a moment in which the theme just goes so slowly that it's almost without tempo, that it just feels atavistic in a certain way. And that's what leads to the fourth movement, which I could talk about unless you have a question.
Okay, I always have questions.
I don't want to go on too long because
no, I know.
that's
no,
my
but
superpower.
I want to read this. I mean, it's a little long, but I'm going to say the Zephaniah quote, the great day of the Lord is near. That's where we're starting with it. Near and hastening fast. The sound of the day of the Lord is bitter. The mighty man cries aloud. The day of the wrath, a day of wrath is that day, a day of distress and anguish, ruin and devastation, darkness and gloom, a day of clouds and thick darkness. So clearly that's that middle part of what you were talking about there with Zephaniah. And then the fourth movement. But before we get there, I'd love to ask Richard just about what is it that you encountered in the solo part yourself? What moved you in particular? And what was it technically that was challenging to accomplish as far as what you've already experienced in rehearsing the solo part?
There are, wow, yeah, good questions. The thing that stood out to me at a certain point was how might be getting ahead of you, but to the last movement, there's so much lyricism and yearning, and I don't know, there's a lot of feeling that that comes out in that, and I think that couldn't be that way without the lead into that, the journey that we've gone through, right, to get there. And then so going back, it sort of puts more into those previous movements. So the seasons are a cycle. Working on something like this is too. I'm speaking probably too vaguely, but it feeds itself. Working on one part informs another, and technically there are really cool challenges. Some little bits and pieces that I've got to spend some quality time with.
Are they technical, or are there extended techniques, or?
Well, at this point, there are a couple of techniques. I wouldn't go so far as to say they're extended techniques. There are some fun harmonics that natural harmonics that get used. Some double stops. Less common are the unison double stops that show up a few times, but that has such a cool effect where you get this sound that then just starts peeling apart. That you don't.
Well said.
It's a neat sound, but I think that everything is. It has a purpose. There are no techniques just sort of thrown in.
They all have a need, and also I would love to ask you, Mark, too, what cello recordings or what did you have in your ear, and why did you pick the cello on this particular piece?
Oh, the cello has been my favorite instrument forever, actually.
Aw.
I mean, honestly, if anyone, and I spend most of my time in the opera house. So
Right.
one of the great delights of this is writing, simply as an orchestral composer, because one can get typed. You write for the stage, and so you don't write for the concert hall. And I really never wanted to be that guy. I wanted to be closer to Britten than to Puccini. But it was always a thought that if one were invited to compose a concerto, that would be my favored solo instrument. Because I think James Galway once said that there are ping people and there are hum people, by which he meant that there are ears that are attracted to brilliance and upper partials and violin and flute, and then there are people who thrive on the richer sounds, the cello, the English horn, all of those. And I am distinctly in the hum category.
Really? I've never heard that before, but I mean, I think the reason that ROCO has a pretty unique sound as an orchestra is we really do try to focus on the low bassoon. We really focus on the bass line, and that's how we tune down, and that's where we try to get our color from, which I think is really exciting.
Bassoon, really?
Well, the wind players do. I haven't really talked to the cellos, but I guess I should have that conversation. It's been 16 years.
Because actually before Little Women, a concerto project that did not happen, although I'm still longing for it, was going to be a bassoon concerto. Actually,
commissioning for that.
So I applaud your taste. But I mean, also, once this idea came in, it occurred to me that to do the piece for violin would simply repeat the Vivaldi. And if the project of last year, which I don't know if I mentioned that, is the title of my concerto, if the project of it is to look at the Vivaldi through the lens of what we know now, well, then you kind of want to use the register and the timbre of the cello as a metaphor for being older and wiser, if you will. That simply the sound of it is going to tell you that, well, we went through the Vivaldi and we know that is no longer sustainable.
That's interesting. That is a great way to say that. And then, so tell me, who is Julia? And why was she born in 2045?
Julia is a made-up character, but the reason that I entitled it that way is because one of the most urgent questions that I had as a composer is, how do you end this piece? Wow. Right after the third movement, in which, as I mentioned, both the orchestra and the soloist try to either outrun or drag behind the message of the spring movement, and both of those strategies fail. You get this momentary wall of sound in which, for the first and only moment in the piece, you leave pitch, you leave rhythm. It's organized noise for a moment, because I didn't think that we could do this honestly without, in some way, to the extent that I could, portraying in sound the real fear, the fear that it could all be wiped out, and there's a way in which the contrast between the rest of the piece, which is pretty much working with pitch and rhythm, and while again, there are techniques that Vivaldi would not have been familiar with, it pretty much, it trusts harmony, a lot of this. But in sketching it out, I thought there's got to be a moment in which harmony fails. Otherwise, I'm not telling the truth about the feeling of it. It's not saying that we are doomed, but it's saying that, again, everything ends up being autobiographical. I stayed up until 1 a.m. thinking it's done. This is it. But then the question becomes, if you were going to try to leave your audience in a place that is both honest and not nihilistic, because even nihilism can be cheap, really. Pessimism can be the easy way out. I thought, what do you do? What do you do with that last movement? And so it begins, as Richard eloquently puts, it begins in a kind of lyrical song of hope. But then the orchestra, as the orchestra comes in and develops that, the cello has to have a moment where, at least in my reading of it, I mean, I'm an opera composer, so everything has an emotional subtext to me, you know, it's my day job. But I did feel that what you needed at that moment was a feeling of recrimination, that you have the optimism and then you feel like, oh my God, what if we ruined it? What if we ruined it for the daughter, the granddaughter, born years from now, and she doesn't have a choice?
Right.
You know, how do you, I mean, as an adult, I don't have children, but I know people who do. And I am so moved by the notion that, as Sternberg reminds us, you know, it's the younger people who are going to be grappling with this in a way that A, is more dramatic, and B, is really not something that they deserve.
Right.
You know, it's decisions of our generation, the generations before, that are creating the world that they're going to be living with.
No,
And I
that's
feel like you can't leave the concerto without acknowledging, in a specifically emotional way as music can, which may not be specific, but I mean, that's how I felt it. You need the optimism, you need a sense of the guilt,
right.
and then you need what happens after. And I did feel that that was the only way to acknowledge where we are, which is still in a very ambivalent place. We might solve this. We've solved things before, but we haven't solved anything like this. So I don't know. And the Interpreter Concerto doesn't know either. So that's why you have, the ending is quite specifically double-edged. The concerto is telling you one thing. Concerto is giving you one intention, and the percussion is saying, maybe. And that's it. And I think that's where we are, which is why the piece was composed the way it was.
Well, and I mean, you probably mean this because you're such, if I could say you're an etymologist, I mean, you really do have such a love of words and love of the language, and that I didn't think you picked Julia out of the blue. I mean, it means youthful, so that's interesting.
Well, yes, it's also, I mean, there's a little bit of an autobiography.
Pinging.
I beg your pardon?
I was trying, somebody's got a ping going.
Oh, forgive me. I'm sorry. I don't know if you mute that without that.
You're fine. It's just the music of your life. It's the music of all our lives now.
The concerto went very well here, and so I am suffering through an avalanche of congratulations. So
that's great.
Go, but I'm sorry about the ringing.
No, you don't have to apologize ever. I mean, look, Richard knows my phone is on my stand, even on stage. So I'm addicted to my phone. It's fine.
My
I love
phone
it.
is muted. It's my computer.
It's my favorite. Oh, no, it's fine. I think it's
my
fine.
Apple betrayed yet again.
Well,
that was Julia was
know.
my mother's name and is also my niece's name.
Aww.
And as you do note, I mean, it is the word itself implies futurity. It implies going forward, and that is it seemed to be metaphorically right, and also to kind of answer Eunice. Eunice, who in the first movement was saying, there's this thing, and it's worth noting that Eunice Foote did not mention greenhouse gases as potentially doom-laden. She was a biologist, and she had simply discovered this and presented it at a scientific conference. And actually, I had not gone looking for her. I simply found her in an issue of the Smithsonian Magazine. And I mean, this will, stop me if you've heard a story like this before. But she presented this, and people said, well, a lady scientist named Eunice Foote has made this very clever discovery, and good for her. And then 2 years later, her paper was co-opted by a male scientist, and suddenly it was considered important. That I know that never happens.
Never.
However, apparently in 1956. So there was a way in which twinning the imagined character of Julia with the actual historical character of Eunice felt right.
That's really great. Well, for both of you guys, what does it mean to you? And I know I sort of know the answer because you did just have the world premiere happening. But what does it mean to you to have a co-commission? Most of our commissions now are co-commissions on purpose to get multiple performances, to get just really connecting, not just in Houston, but not being so myopic, but really trying to expand our global world of what we do in classical music. But what does it mean to you, Richard, to have this already been premiered. It's going to be played after you. It's like, what does that mean to you?
Oh, I'm thrilled to be part of it. I think it's I think a great piece needs to be heard, and so I'm just happy that our portion of it brings it to Houston, and through the streaming to our friends there. I think, this is like an opening run in a way of performances, with some different voices singing it. So I think I'm thrilled to be part of it. Yeah.
Well, and I love the fact that your family's always live streaming it at a different time, or
yeah.
after live streaming it in New Zealand. And Mark, the same question, this piece is co-commissioned with American Composers Orchestra, New Century Chamber Orchestra that just did the world premiere, Manitoba Chamber Orchestra, and ROCO. So all four of us, as not even a triptych, a quadruptych, to be able to do your pieces. But again, to you, you have such a mastery of words as well. What does that mean to you to have co-commissions?
Well, the principal emotion, is gratitude, particularly because I am known as a composer largely in the opera house. This is only the second concerto for any instrument I've ever done. So, to have the faith of these four organizations is very meaningful to me, I have to say. And also, given this particular subject, it's not a New York piece, it's not the Houston piece, it's not the San Francisco piece. We are all living through it. I mean, San Francisco is living through, you might have seen the photographs over the summer when the sky quite literally turned orange because of the wildfires. I've already mentioned Harvey in your city. It's not a city a project that belongs to any given metropolis. In the faith of the people doing it, it does feel like it is a national project. It's an international project, given Manitoba. Again, the second movement is inspired by a Canadian phenomenon. So there's that. There's the civic aspect and my gratitude for the faith in it. But one thing that has been my privilege as an opera composer is that I've just seen many productions of the pieces that they haven't stopped at the premiere, but every production is new. I've seen Little Women, for example, many times. I've seen Lysistrata many times. I can go to Chicago to see another production, Becoming Santa Claus. It's new. It's new. Every artist, every ensemble, every conductor. And I really don't say this sentimentally. This is the kind of writing that I do. The writing that I most value and the writing that I try to practice is specific enough to give its interpreters a map so that it's close enough to the emotional experience that they're not wondering, what am I doing in this bar or in this scene or with this dynamic change? But it's not so confining that there's no breath, that you can't personalize the role, that it can't be your Meg or Lysistrata or cello soloist in this, because I have a rather old-fashioned humanistic idea about what art is supposed to be. It's supposed to host humans rather than make them cogs in a machine. So to that extent, I'm really delighted. I can't wait to hear what you're going to do with this.
Well, that's a great way to end this. And I would just say, thank you for being here tonight on this. It is the co-commission. We'll be playing it this Saturday. And you're right. Little Women, it was the most performed opera in the past 15 years in American opera. That's pretty spectacular.
25 and it still is.
It's amazing. And so we hope this cello concerto, there's a lot of cellists in the world that could play this. We're just going to let you know.
We're Belcher, though.
Exactly. Well, I always say that for me, the composer is the matchmaker between audience and stage. So you can be our Yenta this week.
That's a beautiful idea. Thank you.
You can come and complete us in that. And we will be your co-creators, which will be very exciting this week. Cannot wait to have it 5 o'clock this Saturday Central Time on Facebook, YouTube at ROCO Houston, anywhere you can find us. And just tune in. Thank you so much, Richard. Cannot wait to give you all a hug very soon.
I know. Can't wait. Can't wait.
Bye. Good night.